where we are busy putting death out of business. And, you know, it's in the middle of the TAFS conference right now. TAFS is having a great big conference. Malak, you're at the center of that, and we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about human trafficking with satellites and how we can end human trafficking using satellites. So we'll do that in a sec, but let's quickly thank our sponsors. Thrivous, $5 all the way up to $160 worth of free Thrivous. That's fantastic. Nootropics and geoprotectors, other things. The rules are in the description. Also, I am Transhuman, David Kelly. Thank you very much for sponsoring this episode. Hello, Malak. It's good to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you still?
Fantastic. And how is the conference?
Fantastic. So many subjects, so many amazing speakers. It was and still going on right now, and it is amazing. Actually, I stepped away from I'm assisting the technical team, so I stepped away for 45 minutes because we have a break to go back later.
Yeah, this is a bit of an interim show in between, you know, because you're doing all the technical work and stuff, but you've just given a speech, which is what we want to talk about now, and that's about ending human trafficking using and utilizing satellite technology. So let's talk about satellite technology. Obviously, you know a lot about international law, domestic law when it comes to space, sustainable space, space law and things regarding that. But also, once you put a rocket into space, there's things that go around and around, and those are satellites, and you can utilize those for different purposes. In this, we're talking about decreasing the amount of human trafficking in general. So where do we start on a topic like this?
Well, we start first by having a background on the crime itself.
And what is the crime?
About the crime? Yes, the crime, and we talk. My presentation, it was quite long, but it's very complex subject. There is a lot of dimension in it. It's about the crime itself. It's about the difference between this crime and other similar one, like the smuggling people from one country to another. And the perspective of human trafficking from human rights viewpoint or standpoint. Then we're talking about Africa, so we needed to know the situation of the human trafficking with the African continent. Then we need to talk about the satellite industry or the space technology and capabilities in Africa, an overview. Then how satellite technologies or space technologies can combat human trafficking. It would not stop it because it's very, very complicated, and with countries that they are limited in satellite capabilities and technological capabilities, it's limited, but how we can move forward and how we can make it maximize its use to help in human trafficking. So I would like first to give you an overview. I've done it with the conference, but I would like to share your audience also about it, because what I said this is the stories of human trafficking, and what I do, I advocate for young women that I find during my journey here in what I do in my legal field. So I spread the word that if there is any woman is suffering or coming here and she's suffering from any problem, I can help her, and I can bring forward her issue to the authorities, or I can help with what I can do with my advocacy. Some churches here that are helping, especially for Nigerian women, and they are trying to help, and they relay with the authorities to get them in a safe place, and to help them go back to their country or stay here and try to get them decent works and so on. So yes.
Sorry, I interrupted.
What I wanted to say is, I wanted to say that there are 50 million victims around the world right now. They are living in a situation of modern slavery. When I say modern slavery, it's actually it's a form of this human trafficking that it can be disguised in so many other forms. It starts modern with slavery. It's going to forced marriage, sham marriage. Some in some areas in the world, what they do, they force marry the girl, little girl, to put her into prostitution. They sell babies. They force child begging. So child abduction. All this, it goes under the scope of human trafficking if it fulfills the three criteria or three elements of the crime itself, which I will be presenting to you. In any place or any country in the world, there is right now women, men, or children are exploited into and lured into human trafficking. And it's very important, first of all, that there is awareness about it, because a lot of women, and this is the most common form of human trafficking, which is exploitation for prostitution. And awareness is very important that the woman doesn't fall into that. Like earlier when we were discussing, so from me, I see it from one side, and I read about it and I make researches. But some others, they live it in Africa, and I see how little, young women they don't have a choice. They don't have other choice but being in the hands of traffickers, so she can at least eat or feed her child, because she doesn't even know how I'm going to say it. Young girls, they grow up very fast and they don't know anything, and they get pregnant, and then after that they are in the streets. This story was from Edward. He was saying it there because he saw it. I let you ask me because you wanted to address.
Well, no, I was going to ask you what were the incentives and what was the sort of the supply side of human trafficking, and poverty, war, natural disasters, etc. That's usually a big driver. Any external trauma that comes into a scenario and displaces people. Who was mostly affected? Is this mostly women and children that are affected by human trafficking, or is it a disproportionate amount of men as well? What are the stats? Is it mostly women and children?
Mostly women and girls, little girls. I will give you the exact stats based on the United Nations Office of Drug and Crimes, which was elaborated in the report on trafficking in person in 2018. 21% of men are victims, 49% of women, 23% of little girls, and 7% of little boys. And this is what it was reported, because so many others, and especially in Africa, is not reported. I will tell you that they say guesstimated, because they try to estimate based on the situation of from one country to another. So this one is the age group and sex. Most of them are unfortunately women and little girls.
Yeah, and that's disturbing. It's definitely agendered with those statistics there, and that's only the stats we have. That's definitely a gendered scenario, and it's demand for cheap labor as well, domestic servants, etc. This is a huge problem, and there's countries that will import them from the other side of the world. I mean, this is not not just an African problem. I mean, this is anywhere that there's a supply of poor people and and people who want domestic, they take advantage of that, and that's harder to track. I mean, some of the stuff you're talking about with satellites, which we'll get into in a sec, poverty, war. This might be a little bit easier. Obviously, lots of trauma going on in South Sudan. South Sudan has been a horrible experiment. It's been very, very bad. I've been watching people flee that country endlessly. it's not been a very good success story in that way, and maybe this is something we can talk about in the context of satellites. But yes, absolutely, domestic slavery as well, the sex trade being very bad, and etc. So we're talking satellites. Where do satellites come into in terms of these huge amounts of people, in who are being trafficked? Where do we start? Do we start with poverty and refugees and wars, or is there something else?
You mean the reason for the human trafficking, especially in Africa? It's unemployment, poverty, hunger, corruption, political instability, economic challenges. These problems are based on social tensions, which is leading to issues in the societies, and that's why it is either they are pushed away, these little girls or women or even families, they're selling their kids to traffickers, and they are aware. So it's not all the time that the woman or the kid is lured, because sometimes the parents are, or the family is aware, and they sell away their kids because of socio-economic issues. So yeah, these are the main problems, and in Africa it's even worse than other parts of the world. So that it was that the question,
So
or
where do the satellites come into assisting with human trafficking? Because obviously, poverty. How do you there's some big questions about how would a satellite be used to assist with ending human trafficking, I think.
actually it depends, first of all, of the form of the human trafficking. As I said before, the form can take like it comes in disguised forms. For example, when we talk about satellites, and when we talk about the crime itself, the human trafficking, there is a process of the trafficking crime. So during the process, and I will tell you exactly, there is the recruitment, there is the travel and transit, whether inside the country or outside of the country. There's the detention, exploitation, re-trafficking. There's the integration and reintegration. All these are done through some researchers. So they looked at, and these are the process. When we bring the satellite technologies to the process, it can interfere in any of these processes. So, for example, the recruitment, if we take the example of luring girls through satellite technologies, because internet plays a big role into luring these girls through Facebook, through social medias, and so on. And what I'm saying right now is based on the report that is done by the United States human trafficking report. And especially they were talking about the problem of social medias, which was in 2019. So the ICT, the information communication technologies, is used to lure these girls, or to lure the parents, or so on, to try to give me the kids, and so on. So these are real life examples that it was stated in the report. So if you come in the recruitment side, it can be stopped from going after these fake people that they try to say we want to take them for school, we want to do this, and so on. Or the girls, I have a job for you, and this is what's happening. To the GCC, they say we have a job here, and so on, because the girls, they don't check. And what they do is like they go after, because poverty, and they want to get out of the country. For example, this one of the examples is not the main thing. later on, the travel and transit, okay, if they are in traveling through, let's say, boats, or traveling through big trucks within like areas in Africa, it can be spotted through Earth observation or remote sensing satellites. And here I will give you an example, which I gave it in my presentation in the conference, which is very famous one, put in emphasize the role of satellite technology to combat human trafficking, and bring and free these poor people. So in this one is not in Africa, but it's a case study that I use to show how satellite technologies can assist. So here, trafficking on the high sea. It's very common human trafficking crime. It was uncovered in the off the coast of Papua New Guinea. The critical highlight how space technology can be harnessed to combat human trafficking can be presented through this. In 2015, the crime was revealed using Worldview 3 satellite, powerful enough to spot big boat trawlers for fishing. It's illegal fishing. That's how they use the human trafficking for illegal fishing. And it was 380 miles above the Earth's surface, the trawler and the satellite. And they spotted it after 2 months of investigation and everything, and international cooperation to get these people, because they could see the opening of the big boats and the trawlers, and they could see that the people, they are chained. Can you imagine? And after investigation and months of collaboration, 2,000 enslaved victims were freed.
Wow.
2,000 people. Yeah, and in my presentation over there, I had the actual pictures of the trawlers and how they are pointing to the people inside. And actually, can you imagine? Still, it's the people are chained with real chains.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It reminds me of the transatlantic slave trade. You would train people to in ships like it was like their cattle or something, and you would have thought that in the 21st century that might have been something that's been eliminated, by obviously not, and it's kind of disgusting. I'm kind of disgusted.
Yes. And actually also in Ghana Lake Volta, there are 20,000 children. They work on the lake, and it was done by CNN. It was done by CNN interview and investigation and so on. So these kids, they were freed. One of them, his name is Adam, like my son's name. And that poor kid, he was enslaved for 3 years. He was sold. He was sold by his parents, and it's all about the stories, behind the trafficking thing. So yeah, that's how it is. And actually, satellite technology with remote sensing, they can see it and they can fight it. The problem that I highlighted and I put forward is, first of all, in Africa, there's not a great space capabilities to watch this. So, like I said before with the previous interview that we had, it's very important that the private space actors, they interfere to help these countries and assist, because what we said before, the return on investment is social. It's not only economic, and that's what we are advocating. And I heard you earlier also talking about the earlier in the conference when you had a talk, and you said also that return on business should be return on investment should be social also, and not just look at how much profit they are taking. So it's a social responsibility that they have. and they could interfere to help.
Well, you've mentioned some really interesting things. At the top, you mentioned information transfer. So these technologies are both liberating in the fact that they allow information transfer to happen to poorer countries, but also there's the darker side where they can be used as a honeypot, as a trap to take advantage of vulnerable people and to offer them a life that actually isn't true, that will turn out to be a life of slavery and indentured servitude, and it's terrible. And so yes, the information side of the satellites, which is the social media side, has an obligation to try and fight this in the best way they can. And for the very most part, a lot of those information, social media side is private companies. So therefore, they do have an obligation to try and stem the tide of illegal activity, such as human trafficking, on their websites and on their platforms. And this is just this should be a natural occurrence. And if they sit idly by and allow illegal human trafficking to flourish on their websites, there should be some sort of consequences, economic or justice type consequences for bad actors in this area. You also mentioned that there's this economic play for the demand of cheap labor. You use fishing, which I think is a very, very good one. Fishing, we think of the Horn of Africa when we think of illegal fishing in terms of global efforts to stem piracy. Piracy being an economic factor. If you're a rich country, you don't see a lot of piracy going on because people don't have the sort of they don't have that incentive to go out and raid a ship. But when you've got abject poverty like in Sudan on the Horn of Africa, there, the social, economic, and incentives towards violence and this sort of bad behavior is exacerbated. So it's good that we can try and stop this sort of stuff on the reactive end, but we also need proactive solutions. But satellites can definitely help, and this sort of stuff in Papua New Guinea or the illegal diamond mines or the illegal plantations, or in South America you have a lot of illegal oil places that use slave labor. We can find these gold, silver mines in rainforests. You can find these stations using using these satellites, image them, find them, and destroy these illegal entities that are using cheap human labor to bolster economic profits. Slavery. I mean, we're talking about an institution that was done away with in the 1700s, the 1800s, but also something that's been proven throughout history from the Rome collapsed as an empire, and many empires have collapsed because of their over reliance on slaves. Slaves it's turned out to be a factor that is a civilization destroying factor. And so it's very interesting to hear. So information, physical location, and other things, human slavery is a tragedy. Human trafficking as well, and it ends up leaving a cycle, especially in terms of the women that you're talking about. It ends up leaving a poverty cycle, leaving a cycle, and every time that cycle gets bigger, it gets harder to undo. So we really have to try and use whatever technologies, including satellites, to eliminate this sort of bad behavior now.
Yes, and also the authorities in the countries and like with the presentation, I couldn't have time, and now also I need to go to join them on the conference side. But it's very important because also I highlighted the issue of the laws, the national laws to combat human trafficking in Africa. And I took some examples of some different countries, and there is a problem there, because even with the international norms, they're not coming to the let's say close to the international norm, not even above that. So there's a huge problem and a lot of work to do. Satellite technologies, it's not enough. Like I said before, it's like if you give the technology to the best government, but if the government doesn't know how to use and doesn't want to use because of corruption, you don't do anything.
Yeah, it's the old fisherman's proverb, teach a person to fish, that one, or it is about it's about behavior of actors, and we would like to see different behaviors, and this is why things like the United Nations or whatever, or and also the other thing is if governments won't utilize data and information on human trafficking, maybe private companies should stop doing business with such said governments. I don't know which governments they are. Could be my own country. I'm not saying anything about who, what, when, where, or why. But I mean, if there's a human rights abuser out there in the form of a state, maybe a company should have an obligation to say, you know what, there might be money to be made, but we're not going to make it because we don't want to, fill up the purses of bad actors in the international system. Malak, I know you got to go. You're doing a great job with TAFs.
Thank you so much
the TAFs.
for having me.
You're doing a great job, and we've just seen Maria. We've just seen some good stuff from the Sense Foundation. There's plenty more to come, and everything that's happened has been beautiful already. So you stay safe, stay well, have fun at the conference.
So I'm just assisting them. I'm not the main, so that's why I need to go. I'm
yeah. No, totally understand.
Thank them all for everything, and I would be happy to see you tomorrow. I think your session.
Yeah. I'm doing some sort of speech. I got to get ready for that. I got to figure out what to say. All right, cool. Well, that's been lots of fun. That's Malak. That's Detonation. That's with human trafficking. It's a huge. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Human slavery, human trafficking. It's something you would think would be eliminated as a topic, but especially when it comes to prostitution, and people taking advantage of things like wars or poverty or famine. People taking advantage of this. This is something despicable, and it's something that we as a world really need to reflect on and use technologies such as satellites and use institutional processes in order to eliminate. So thank you very much, Malak. Enjoy TAFs. I will talk to you soon. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much.